All right. Well, welcome everyone to Is the Freelance Life for Me? And hopefully we'll all have an answer to that question by the end of this program. I'm Ruth Nasrullah. I am the president of the Houston chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. And we're so happy to have you here. I'd like to introduce my co-host for the evening, Elizabeth Machuca. Elizabeth.
Hello, everybody. I am president of Sam Houston State University, SPJ, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So tonight we have four great panelists. I'm personally really excited about this program, and I hope you are too. I think we're going to learn a lot. And Elizabeth, if you'd like to just let us know who two of our speakers are tonight.
All righty. So our first speaker is Hazel Becker, a retired journalist whose 50-year career centered on writing, editing, and developing publications with a niche audience. Becker freelanced for the first and last decades as bookends. As a freelancer, she edited and wrote for business-to-business publishers, community newspapers, and magazines. In retirement, she remains an active member of Society of Professional Journalists and is a founding member and former chair of SPJ's freelance community. Hazel Becker.
Hi, everybody.
All right. And for our next guest, we have Mira Gebel, a freelance writer based in the Pacific Northwest. She writes about anything from business and technology to arts and culture. She held positions in newsrooms across the country, from the Detroit Free Press and the Baymont Enterprise to the San Francisco Business Times and Business Insider. Her work has been featured in Digital Trends, Insider, Dame Magazine, and The Independent Worker, Petapixel, Willamette Week, and USA Today, and more.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We also have with us Lauren Larson, who is a senior editor at Texas Monthly and was previously an editor at GQ, two great publications. She has written celebrity profiles, feature stories, and essays. And finally, we have Chris Winfield, who's worked with NFL Films, Fox Sports, and ESPN Radio. He runs the production company Forever Real and creates content for entrepreneurs and businesses across the world. He has a master's in digital media studies and has been involved in production for 9 years. This year, he left his full-time position as an instructor to pursue production full-time. So congrats to you, Chris. All right, let's get started. Elizabeth? You're muted.
Yep, let me go ahead and pull the questions. All righty, so this question is going to go for Mira. You're young and have good success. What is the secret?
I mean, not being afraid to fail is number one, I think. My very first year of freelancing was probably the most difficult thing of my career in journalism so far. And that was because I largely didn't know a lot about the freelance industry. So it took a lot of trial and error for me to really find my footing. There's not a lot of great educational resources that are, stem from academia for freelancing. So I had to really just figure it out on my own, really connect to some freelance communities. But I would say that I'm not incredibly successful, but a lot of people consider, me to be, but I still feel like I'm still trying to find my footing. But I think the secret is really just throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what works for you, and then not being afraid to, number one, feel stupid, and then number two, not being afraid to fail.
Thank you. I'm glad it's okay for me to feel that it's a plus for me to feel stupid once in a while. So
I feel stupid all of the time. So that's something I always
well,
say.
they say a lot of writers have imposter syndrome, right? So maybe that's what it's all about. So Hazel,
you're not learning anything.
Right, there you go. Hazel, you are going to be our resident business guru this evening. Tell us the key things freelancers should know from a business perspective.
There are so many, but the most important one, I think, is that you are now the boss. So you have to be the boss of you. You have to run your business. You have to keep the lights on. You have to pay the bills. And if you just keep thinking of yourself as a writer or a reporter who gets assignments because somebody gives them to you, then that's not a real good way to get started. So the most important thing then is you are the boss and you have to treat your freelancing like a business. So I will just leave that for there and we can come back to some other things later.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Hazel. And this question goes for Chris. As videographer on the panel, tell us what's unique about freelancing doing video reporting.
I'd say one unique thing is that every day is different. For me specifically, I never know what I'm walking into week to week, but I know that I'm working with a entrepreneur or some business, and ultimately my goal is to tell their authentic story, right? So I would say that it's never mundane, and there's always something exciting, which I would say makes it rather unique.
All right, thanks, Chris. And Lauren, the question on every freelancer's mind, what does the editor want? What is it that you're looking for in a pitch?
Well, first, I would shout out to all the students who are in this Zoom. We are currently taking applications for our internship program, which is great. So that's one thing I'm looking for. But in a pitch, I suppose the biggest thing I'm looking for is a distinctive voice. And I can see that in the pitch itself. I can see that in the clips that I receive. That's kind of one of the more intangible parts and unteachable parts of what we do. And I think that's, if you have a great voice, not to say that if you're not already there, you won't get there, but I'm immediately sold if someone is doing sort of like interesting turns of phrase in the pitch. That's an easy way to win me over. I also just love to see that a lot of effort has gone into the pitch. An easy way to signal that you've thought about something a lot is including a head and deck, which it's just like right away, I'm blown away. And then in the clips that you include, I like to see like 3 to 5, quite a few, but not like an overwhelming amount. It's also helpful to link to your website if you have one, so I can seek out more. And in those clips, I really like to see, again, a strong voice and a weird story sense, but also continued relationships with different publications. It's a little bit concerning to me when someone has only written once for everywhere that they've ever worked with. And you know, some writers are just super scattershot in their attentions and pitch different places all the time, but I love to see that someone has even 3 or 4 repeat appearances. And then I'm a features editor, so I think what I look for in features specifically are stories that I don't know about. I think it can be really, really tempting to pitch the big story on everyone's mind. And that's great. If you have an interesting way in, I definitely want to hear it. But what really sells me from someone I haven't heard from before is a sort of left field idea, like, don't pitch the big celebrity who's going to go on the cover because we've already talked about it. Pitch the character actor who's in the same movie who's going to have a lot more to say. But we can get more into that later.
Well, let me ask you this, though. What would make you just crumple it up and throw it away immediately?
I think it's pretty clear when not a lot of effort has been put in. Typically, I don't respond to pitches where someone has pitched a topic versus a story. I want to write about concerts versus, you know, I want to write about this tragedy at Astroworld or something like that. And even better, you know, beyond that, that still feels like a topic, writing about the story within that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a compelling pitch. I think that there's sort of a, the outreach email that just drives me up the wall is introducing yourself and saying, hi, I'm available for whatever story you want to assign me, because we just don't think like that. And I'm always glad to hear from great writers, but I can't really do much with that in the moment.
Okay, thanks. Elizabeth?
Alrighty, so this question is kind of like in general, so whoever wants to answer it, and then we can also just have a discussion over it. So the question is, have you worked in a newsroom, and if so, how does it compare? If you haven't, would you, or did you consider it at some point? Anybody?
Who has worked in a newsroom? Okay, Chris is the
Well-
only free spirit.
I'll start.
Okay,
I
go ahead.
started out freelancing because back in the dark ages when I was starting out in my career, there was a nepotism rule and I was married to a newspaper reporter. And I couldn't work for his paper. I couldn't work for his competition. We moved to a place where things were, it was a smaller place than Washington, D.C., which is where we had lived previously. And so there wasn't a whole lot of other opportunity. And we're talking about the 1970s. So a lot of you weren't born yet, I understand. But, you know, everything was done in the mail. And I missed the experience of the newsroom from my college newspaper. But after freelancing then for 10 years, I did end up going to work for publication here in Washington or in the Washington area now known as BNA, and it's now part of Bloomberg. And I was in their newsroom or a number of their newsrooms for almost 30 years. And it's very different because you have people you can bounce things off of, and there's always something going on around you. And whereas freelancing can be a very lonely pursuit. Doesn't have to be, but it can be. And then I freelanced after that, and I just made my own excitement after that. It was good.
Alrighty, and Mira, would you like to share your experience?
Sure. So I've interned fellowship staff roles at over a half dozen publications across the US, from San Francisco to New York to Detroit to Texas. And the one thing that a newsroom job really can't give you that freelancing does is your own freedom. So I like having a schedule that works for me. I don't like being on the whim of an editor. I like pitching stories that I want to do. I don't want to write stories that I don't want to do. So I have a lot of more editorial freedom as a freelancer. And I think that that has really helped me in my career expand the topics that I write about, because I was strictly tech and business reporting when I was in the newsroom. But when I left, I got to explore all of these different interesting facets of feature reporting, arts and culture. I didn't really have a tight beat that I was stuck into. Or if my editor said, oh, Mira, I want you to cover, this incident, or I want you to write a quick blog post, I would have to do that. I don't really get to say no. So I like being able to say no. That's one of my biggest things about freelancing is I get to say no. I get to dictate my own editorial calendar. I get to follow stories that matter to me. And I get to make my own schedule. I'm a very emotionally in tuned person. So if I wake up in a bad mood and I don't want to work, I don't work that day. And I can do that because I'm a freelancer. I make my own deadlines. I can't do that if I'm a staff reporter. I can't say, oh, I don't want to go to work today because I'm in a bad mood. Like you can't really pull that off as a staff reporter. You have to, go and work and grind. And I think there's a lot of grind and hustle culture that's associated with newsroom positions today. Whereas with freelancing, you kind of get to block in and schedule in your own, work-life balance. And that's something that I've really appreciated. But just like Hazel said, freelancing can be sometimes very solitary. I do miss the kind of one-on-one mentorship opportunities that you get with newsrooms. That's something that cannot be overstated, and especially for young journalists who are trying to carve out their own path. That's a good way in. But there are a ton of freelance communities out there, especially SPJs, as well as Twitter. Twitter has been my best friend for the last 3 years. I've been able to find jobs through that way. So there's a really big community of freelancers. You just have to tap into it and find it.
Thanks. And actually, if I could just step in, and Chris, since you freelance and travel, do you find it, that sort of solitude affects you more or less because you're out in the world?
I would definitely say more, but to Mira's point, looking for those mentors, I've always believed in having a mentor to kind of assist and guide me. So even in this freelance world, I want to say at this very moment, I have three who kind of help me and say, this is what you need as far as documents are concerned, as far as contracts are concerned, and help me structure my business. So I would say yes, definitely. But what I've also done is constructed a team so that I'm not alone in this freelance world, because it can be isolating. You can feel like you're by yourself, and sometimes it does get hard, but you do need a shoulder to lean on. You do need a support system. You do at times need a team to help you with these projects. And then it kind of gives me that sense of community, as if I was in a newsroom, to bounce those ideas off of people, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And oh, sorry.
No,
and
go ahead, Elizabeth.
And Chris, how would you find your mentors, like when you're out there being a freelancer by yourself?
Social media, and then just talking to people and networking. There's always something going on in whatever city it is that you're in. If there's a production going on, I would even offer to be a PA just so I can meet people, talk, and then you find the people that you ultimately want to be like, and you find the people who are doing exactly what you want to do. The way that I found my mentor was I was shooting a commercial when I first left Fox Sports for a small soccer community or something of the sort. And the lead DP is now my mentor, now a very good friend of mine, and we talk on a regular basis. He helps me, he gives me tips. I do the same for him. We recommend people who can also assist with projects when we're working on things.
All right, thank you.
All right, so Hazel, can you give us some of those nuts and bolts of the business end, because she's the guru, she's the expert.
Thanks, Ruth. I just posted in the chat a link to an SPJ handout called Freelance Business Basics. And it just has a number of topics and then bullet points under them. But basically, the most important thing I think that's hardest for you to learn is that you have a contract for everything that every assignment that you take on. And even if it's just a verbal contract, that is a contract, but you can't necessarily enforce it. So if you want to have a say in the terms of how you're going to work with the publication or with the radio station or any media outlet, then you need to have a contract that both sides agree to. And that can be done informally through an email exchange. But you do need to have a contract because you need to know what your deadline is going to be. You need to know what the flavor of the story should be. You need the editor or the assignment person, the assignment desk, to tell you what they're expecting it to be like. You have a length to consider. You need to know whether they are requiring you to have a certain number of sources. So all those things should be laid out in a contract, but you also want to know how much they're going to pay you and when they're going to pay you. And you also need to know who owns your work. So that gets us to the next major topic in the handout, is copyright. When you write something, including a pitch, and you commit it to any fixed medium, i.e. a file on your computer or a notepad or anything like that, that's you own that copyright. But the publication that is going to pay you is going to expect some rights in exchange for that. It's important to have those things spelled out in the contract too. Used to be first North American rights. It's still to some extent first North American rights for some publications, but more and more publications are asking for all rights. And if they're going to get all rights, my recommendation to you is make sure they're paying you for all rights. Otherwise, you can't then use your research. to go ahead and do, if you, sorry, I got twisted up there. If you sell all rights, then you cannot then use your work again. But if you don't sell all rights, then you can take the kernel of your story and write it again for a different publication and again for a different publication. If it's a local story, you can make it regional. It's possible that you might be able to make it bigger regional. And then it might become a national story as well. There are all kinds of ways that that can happen, but you have to have those things spelled out ahead of time. So that's the first part.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Alrighty, and this is going to be a general question. Do you work from your home or do you rent an office space? Do you have any hints for staying productive when working solo?
I work from home. I've been working from home for the last 3 years before the pandemic. So I think one of the things that's really important about being self-employed is understanding, like, we have sleep cycles. We understand what time we like to go to sleep. Was that like circadian rhythm or something like that? You need to find your productivity rhythm. Don't force yourself to work in between a certain amount of hours where you're just completely brain dead. Like, for example, the afternoon, I can't get anything done in the afternoon. I'm just like completely spaced out. So one of the great ways to make sure that you're, on top of yourself is knowing what hours of the day you are productive. I like to take calls and interviews in the morning when I'm mentally fresh. I like to do my writing late at night when I don't have anything to bother me. So I usually write from like 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., but then I take calls from like 9 to 11 a.m. So you need to find what works for you, and don't force yourself to sit down and write something. And if you find that it's taking you hours to do something that may have taken you 30 minutes, get up and walk away.
And for Chris, whenever, like, do you work in a home space or where do you do your freelancing work?
So technically I work from home, but I'm never at home. The majority of the work that I do is in Atlanta, Florida, and then occasionally Los Angeles. So the majority of what I'm shooting is on location, either at the subject's home or studio space that we have rented. As far as editing is concerned, the majority of that is done at home for me. I don't have a studio space. Typically we just rent them because I move around so much so. But I would say, to Mira's point about time and figuring out what works for you, I know that in the morning, I will get absolutely nothing done ever. I'm not a morning person, but I know that between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., I am a monster and I am extremely productive. It makes no sense, but it works for me. So figuring out what your rhythm is and what times work for you. So I know from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., I will not stop and I can do absolutely anything. It will knock out 10, 20 projects. But if you try to make me do that from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., maybe 1 or 2. Maybe, but figuring out what works for you. And then also in the freelance world, it's very important that you figure out a schedule so that you still have time for yourself, for those that are around you. It's very easy to kind of bury yourself into your work and forget that, hey, I need to step outside and get some sunshine and take a breath of fresh air at times.
Yeah. And Lauren, I have a question for you. Do you have different expectations if you know that someone is who's pitching to you is more of an early career versus a more experienced writer? Do you have different standards or expectations, or what's your approach to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think, well, I'm a lot nicer if someone sort of makes a flub as an early career journalist versus a later career journalist. But I would say that chiefly from journalists who are a little greener in the field, I am not expecting those writers to pitch features right off the bat. And it's totally fine to just come in. I know I'm a features editor, but I also appreciate getting a 2,500 word pitch from someone, or a pitch for even like a really sharp 800 word piece, just so we can get to know each other a little bit. And, even with like mid-career and later career journalists that I'll do that as well. I don't typically assign like a big narrative yarn to a writer I haven't worked with at all. Even if they have stellar clips, I'll usually ask for something shorter first. So that's what I'd recommend.
Mhm. All right, good to know.
All righty. And for Hazel, what is the thing you would most advise freelancers to do? And what is the thing you would advise freelancers not to do?
Oh, my goodness.
Broadly speaking.
I know.
Find community is the thing that I most advise you to do. Whether it's through SPJ, there are other organizations too. There are affinity groups, the NABJ, NAHJ, Asian American Journalists Association, the Native American Journalists Association are some of them. And then there are other kinds of groups. There's the ASJA, American Society of Journalists and Authors, is another one that has networking groups. And another one, if you write for business to business publications, is the, it's called ASBE, ASBPE, American Society of Business Publication Editors, I think is what it is. And they actually have a monthly freelancing get together, networking. Your local SPJ chapter may have a group that you can get together with. In Washington, DC, we have a group that's been meeting pretty much monthly for 8 years now. People come and go, but we pretty much shore each other up. We are the newsroom for each other. If you are overtaxed and you can't take an assignment, but you want to make sure that your editor has somebody good to go to, send them to another person that you've met through one of your networking groups. So mostly, I think the important thing I'm trying to say is don't try to go this alone. Yes, you are alone. Yes, you are on your own. And you're making your own decisions, but that doesn't mean that you have to be alone and lonely and feel isolated. The thing not to do is be afraid. The thing not to do is have imposter syndrome. We are all imposters at some point, but that doesn't mean that we have to let that rule our lives. And so the one technique that I've always used for interviewing people is to go into it as though I know nothing and say, can you teach me about this? Can you help me learn what I need to know to write this story? That is a very good way to do it without making yourself feel like an imposter. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but.
It does. And actually, if I can just jump in, I didn't say at the beginning when I introduced myself that I am a freelancer also. And I had been away from it for a few years. And when I came back, one of the things that I did was start going to joining writers groups and taking, online classes. And that really makes a huge difference. There's just not a lot of us around necessarily, people who know what we're talking about, which is probably true of a lot of careers, but I find that, really helpful. Okay, here's a question for anyone. Do you use any kind of productivity tool like software or something, anything like that okay, Chris, tell us about it. He started nodding right away, like, yes.
I've learned one thing, like Hazel said, as far as contracts go and just dealing with clients, having systems in place makes your life 1,000 times easier. And one site that me and my team use specifically is Honeybooks. It allows us to send proposals, it allows us to send out contracts, it allows us to send out invoices, and it keeps track of our production from the planning phase and initial conversation all the way to it being completed, finalized, and sent to the client. So I use Honeybook.
Anybody else? Hazel, I know you've talked about some of them at conferences and such.
Yeah, I did a fun session on 30 tools to boost your freelance productivity at the SPJ conference in September, and that was kind of fun. So I do know about a lot of them. The one that I used to track my time is called Fanurio, but there's a fee for it.
Yeah.
But there is another one called Toggle, Time Toggle, or Track Toggle Track, I think is what it's called, is another one that will help you track how much time you're spending on different tasks, how much time you're spending for different clients. And as you rack up the assignments and realize that you put in a week's worth of work and you're pretty much only going to be able to bill about 2 days worth, then you'll realize the importance of knowing how you're spending your time. So that's time tracking software.
Thanks. And we wanted to spend the last 20 minutes or so with Q&A. So if people have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can start compiling those, addressing those. Elizabeth, did you have another question?
Well, this one was just like for Hazel. You were saying about being your own boss. How can we do that?
Be organized, be motivated. It's hard to be motivated to go out and pitch all the time because honestly, if you hit 10% of your pitches, you're doing really well. You just have to keep pitching. There are pitching clinics. There are tools to learn about pitching. At the freelance community, we have a database at spj.org/freelance.asp. I'll write it in the chat in a minute. We have a link to a database of pitching guidelines, and we have almost 400 publications in it now. And so it's basically is a way to kind of peruse where you could take a certain kind of story. Read the guidelines. That's another tip I have. Be your own boss, but let someone else tell you how to sell it to them. Read their guidelines. Follow them too.
We have some good questions coming in. So if no one minds, I'd like to kind of dive into these a little bit. What do freelancers do about things like healthcare and other benefits? One of my concerns about leaving my job is not being able to access healthcare and mental health resources that my job provides.
Lots of states have their own healthcare exchanges. I get my health insurance through the state exchange. I pay a monthly fee. I think it's like less than $100 or something like that. I'm in Washington state, so it's a little bit more liberal over here in terms of access to healthcare. And then mental health is included in that as well. I, for one, also see therapy, you know, I do naturopath, lots of stuff like that, and it's all covered underneath my health insurance. And I'm self-employed, so I just have to make sure I report my income so then they can fluctuate my rate. But a lot of people get them from, I think if you're married, a lot of freelancers who are married get them from their spouse.
Yeah, great reason to get married, right? Yeah. So every freelancer should marry someone with health insurance.
SPJ also offers a health insurance marketplace. I haven't had to use it, luckily. My former employer still pays a chunk of my Medicare supplement program. But SPJ does have a marketplace. There are a lot of other benefits there. And if you're an SPJ member, you might want to just look through and see what there is.
Yeah, spj.org. And the next question, experienced writer / editor here from a local newsroom background. Is it necessary for freelance journalists, especially investigative journalists, to form an LLC or get some sort of liability insurance specifically to cover potential defamation lawsuits or the like?
I would say no, but I may pass this off to Hazel. You can discuss all of that in your contract. So that in terms of the indemnity clause, you can make sure the indemnity flows both ways so that the publisher also covers you in case you do get sued, but you also cover the publisher as well. It's called mutual indemnity. And I think that is what really saves investigative reporters. But I think all of those concerns usually are hammered out into contracts, and you don't need to form an LLC or anything of the like if you're just doing a project-based investigative series.
And Lauren, it looks like you have something to add.
Oh no, that was exactly right. In fact, I'd warn against a project that isn't, contractually safe.
But let me also add that you don't have to take every contract that is handed to you and sign on the dotted line. A lot of companies, a lot of media outlets will negotiate to some extent on the contract. But if they want you to take all the liability, I hope you won't do it. It's become more and more a thing in the industry for publications, some of which are struggling and some of which are not, to just shove all the liability onto the freelancers. That's not right.
Elizabeth, do you want to take the next couple of viewer questions? Or have you been following them, or should I go ahead?
I'll go ahead and start with this one. Do y'all schedule your days off? And do you recommend it?
Yes. Do
What are
it.
your days off, Hazel?
Wow.
Say that.
What
Say
are
it
your
again.
days off?
I take the weekends off, but I am also retired. Understand that, please. But I always took the weekends off when freelancing. I freelanced the first 10 and the last 10 years of my active career. And weekends off. I mean, listen, there are exceptions to that. If somebody sends you on to cover a meeting that starts at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, you've got to travel on Sunday. So that's the way it is. But I highly recommend time off. Otherwise you burn out.
Yes, very true. How about you, Mira?
There are hardly days where I work 8 hours. Like, I think that maybe I work 20 to 25 hours a week. And that's because the one thing that I also want to add is because my rate is very high, and I don't take anything below my rate. So if you want to work less, ask for more money, and then you don't have to work. So that's one of my biggest tips. And then, yeah, I mean, I schedule a ton of time off. I just make sure that I can meet all of my deadlines. I usually don't work on a weekend unless I procrastinate super hard and work on a Sunday night, but I rarely work 8 hours a day.
All right. Okay. Going back to the viewer question, I'm so jealous. What are, I mean, I would, yeah, I don't know. I go disappear for a while and watch Netflix for a little bit, and like that's my day off. I just like can't bring myself to just not, to withdraw altogether.
I call those TV breaks. I do those.
Yeah, exactly. I'm studying British baking in a competition. It's very important. What are some tips you could give when looking for the right market and intended audience? A general question for anyone.
Well, I would say that one thing that I look for are writers who have, even in magazines, kind of identified a beat for themselves. And that can be quite loose. Again, I'm really drawn to the character actor profile writers. That's a niche that I think lends itself very well to great voices. But there's just so much value in becoming known for doing a particular kind of story or covering a particular beat. So do that wherever you can.
I'd say on the flip side, I think there's like a happy medium, because there's a lot of freelancers out there who will tell you that you need to niche down and you need to find what you're really good at. But I think that kind of puts you in a box as a freelancer. Sure, you want to own your beat, like as a typical beat reporter would. But, you know, as someone like me who is a features reporter, I don't stick to like just tech features or just business features. But I think that's a really good point, is like, I think when you do cover a beat for a certain set of time, it gives you a lot of tools as to, you know, how to source, how to write quickly. As Lauren was saying, was like, if there's a reporter out there who just knows healthcare, that, you know, an editor like Lauren is going to turn right to the person who knows healthcare. But I wouldn't, you know, as a freelancer, I wouldn't limit yourself. And there's a lot of intersections that you can do with your beat, like health and tech or health and science. So I think you need to find something that, number one, you're interested in as a freelancer. I'm not going to write about politics or sports because I don't know anything about politics or sports, but I will write about tech and business and the internet, and like, you know, culture. So just find what you really like and try to find interesting ways in where you can pull different topics in. And the one thing about being a freelancer is great is you don't work in just one marketplace. So you can pitch a story that has an angle that is based in Texas, or a story that, you know, is based here in Washington. There's a lot of big national trends that you can localize on a city to state level, that can be really effective.
Thanks. And another question from an audience member: what helped you most when becoming a freelancer? What is the first step? Chris is thinking hard. Do you have an answer, Chris?
I almost want to go back to the concept of a mentor. I think when I first started, I was very big on the art and just creating and telling great stories. But that mentor helped me to say, hey, this can really be a business, and this is how you need to properly structure it. So I'd say what greatly helped me in taking that first step to become a freelancer is finding someone who's already done it and then allowing them to assist and guide you as well, so you're not alone in this.
Yeah. And another question, I see Hazel put some basics in the file she shared, but any key tips on negotiating pay and other rights, knowing your key rights as a freelancer?
I think I can speak to that a little bit. As the negotiatee, one thing that I'm always surprised writers don't do often is ask their editors for specifics on how a piece performed. And that kind of thing, when you are headed for a negotiation, having specific numbers without, either it can give you good context for why a negotiation doesn't go your way, or it can provide a lot of leverage if your pieces are just soaring. I also think it can be useful to remember that your editor will ultimately have to answer to a higher power when explaining a decision to give you more money. And again, like, it can be really, really helpful as an editor to be armed with that kind of thing when I have to send something up the ladder, because I still only have so much autonomy in a company.
Thanks. And as part of a contract, should you consider a budget?
A budget for the contract?
I'm not sure.
There are a few ways to look at that. One is you have a budget of your time. So And another is the media outlet going to pay your expenses? Or are they only going to pay you and then you have to pay your mileage and parking, or etc.? These are all things to bring up with the assignment editor when you're negotiating to take the assignment.
Thanks. Yeah, Elizabeth, I think I'm going to switch over to just the audience questions. So I don't know if you're following along, but
It doesn't show me what questions.
oh, is it just coming to me? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Well, the next question is, how much experience should you have before freelancing? How many connections should you have in a city or in an industry?
There is no way to quantify this, and I wouldn't quantify it. You can start right now with the skills that you have. You know what a good story is. You know how to write. You know all the skills that you are learning right now. I know the majority of people in this panel are students, but the skills you are learning right now, I'm not a superior to you. I'm your colleague. So you can take all of the skills that you are learning in school right now, or that you have learned in skills, and you can start right away. I don't think you need to have all of this, experience baked into you before you can start freelancing. You just have to start, and starting is the hardest part. But I don't think it's wise to quantify how many years you have to have, or how many mentors you have, or how many Twitter followers you have. You can start right now with the skills that you have and iron them out along the way. I think it goes back to my point about saying, don't be afraid to fail and try a lot of different avenues, and just be really honest with yourself about what works and what you want to achieve as a freelancer.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about setting prices? I know it varies with experience at the type of assignment, but I don't want to undercharge. For my sake, freelancers must value their skills, or overcharge at risk of hurting my reputation with other editors who are looking for affordable pitches. All right.
If you're an SPJ member, then you should be able to log into the website and have access to the freelance guide called On Your Own, a guide to freelance journalism. And there are chapters in the guide that help you understand how money is made in the freelance journalism world, and how you should think about setting your rates. One thing that I have heard people say after they've been freelancing a few years is, oh, I never knew that I didn't have to say yes to everything that somebody offered. Don't take 10 cents a word unless it's something you really want to write and you really want to get published. There's a very experienced freelancer named Catherine Reynolds Lewis, who has taught, and she taught me a lot when I was coming back to freelancing in the latter part of the aught years. And she used to say, and probably still does, that there are three P's. You take an assignment for pay. You take an assignment for your personal, something personal that you're getting out of it, and for publicity for yourself. So if it's good for you to say on your website, and yes, everybody probably is going to need a website eventually. If you can say on your website that you have written for the Boston Globe and the Washington Post and the LA Times and maybe the Dallas Morning News, they don't take a lot of freelance stuff, but If that's good for you in what you want to do with your career, and they're paying 25 cents a word, it's a trade-off that you make, because you're getting something else that you need for it. You're getting something in your portfolio that shows people the kind of work that you can do. So the 3 Ps, portfolio, your personal, and your pay.
Thanks. All right. Question for the writers. Can Mira, Chris, and Hazel describe what it's like to work with editors after a pitch is accepted through multiple drafts of a story until publication? And then can Lauren describe some best practices based on how she likes to work with a freelancer to shape a piece? So let's hear from the writers first. What's the experience like? Or should we start with Lauren?
They're all different. They're, you know.
I agree.
I think if you have an established relationship with an editor, the pitching process is a lot easier. Sometimes you can pitch editors, just a couple of sentences, and they'll just say, go for it. I trust you, because you already have an established relationship of being able to do the work and turn in clean copy. But if you're working with somebody new, sometimes someone will reach out to me for an assignment. They'll offer me a story. I'll say yes. I kind of give them my reporting and writing plan, just in a couple of sentences, who I want to talk to, when I can get it done, my rate. And then the editor agrees. They send me over a contract. I send them over, a W-9, all that kind of stuff. And then I go off into the world and I do the reporting and writing. I turn everything in by the deadline or before the deadline. I get my first edit back in a couple of days. I usually work on edits same day, send them back. And then rarely it needs a second edit, in my experience. And then the piece is published, I'm paid, woo, and then I get to work on my next story.
And Lauren, best practices on how you like to work with a freelancer to shape a piece.
Well, from my end, I think that I'm probably a lot more invasive. It's rare that I will do fewer than 2 edits. Typically, I'll start with a massive structural edit, unless something comes in exquisitely. Big structural edit, and then when the structure is set, that's when I sort of get in on a line level, and even, I might even wait until that point to push for more reporting if we need it, just so we can see how the structure has come out. But yeah, and I think that best practices for writers during that process are just make every deadline, and if something is like end of the day on Thursday, don't send it end of the day Friday. That's really, really different. That means my weekend is toast. So just keeping things like that in mind is really helpful.
Got it. And yes, everyone, this recording will be on our Facebook page. Someone asked if we would have access to the recording. And how do you write quickly? I do not have an answer for that myself.
I have a good answer for this.
Okay.
I took a deadline writing course in college.
Really?
At Columbia with Amy Singer. And she had the best advice. Keep your ass in the chair. Don't get up until it's done. Just spew all of the nonsense out of your brain, and then just get it on the page and do a lot of really honest self-editing. And don't, if you're on deadline, don't move your butt. Just stick there and stay there. And it's worked for me.
My first draft is always that, just like, whatever comes into my mind, and we'll deal with it later. That's interesting. All right, here's a good question, a hot question. Can the speakers share their rates and tips for developing rates?
I have a really good one for this as well. There's a freelancer named Jenny Gritters. She has a really good equation that I started going by myself. for how she sets her hourly rates. You have to really look at your expenses and your financial goals. So every month you have a financial goal for yourself to cover your bills, your rent, putting some money into savings. You take that number, let's say it's like $2,000, and then you divide that number by how many hours a month you want to work. So if I want to work, 40 hours a week, 40 hours a month, that's rare, right? I don't even do that. But then I would divide it by my financial goal. So financial goal divided by how many hours a month I want to work, and then take that number and then times it by 20% to account for taxes. And that's a really good way for you to figure out an hourly rate. My hourly rate usually hangs between $150 an hour to $250 an hour, but I also take a lot of client-facing work. So that's content writing, ghostwriting, sponsored content writing, and that stuff usually pays more than journalism. So that's my bread and butter usually, and why I'm able to get those rates that are so high.
Okay, and I think it goes without saying that your work has to be meticulous, right? You have to, the product has to be exquisitely perfect, right? In order to, yeah.
I wouldn't say it has to be perfect. I would just say if you get an assignment where that's $600 and my rate is $150, I'm not going to spend more than 4 hours on that story. So I have to make my hourly rate match the rate that the publication is giving me. So I'm not exploiting myself or my hourly rate, or I'm not asking for an absurd amount of money. I'm making it work within my own hourly guidelines.
Got it.
The one thing that I would say different from that is that I don't think 20% is enough for taxes. I
live in a
would
state with no
normally
tax.
say 35 but it depends what bracket you're in. So that may make a difference what your marginal bracket is. But you don't only need to make the money to pay for taxes. And by the way, put that away out of every paycheck. Have a separate savings account and plunk your 30% or 33%, however much you're going to take every month, into a separate savings bucket so that you have the money when it's time to pay the quarterly taxes. But you also have other expenses of doing business. And if you, just as an example, if you have to take care of your own health insurance, that's a benefit that somebody else used to take care of for you. And now you're going to have to do that on your own. So make sure that you are charging enough extra for that too.
I'd be interested in knowing your rate, Chris, and yours, Hazel.
Want me to go, Hazel, or you want to go?
Well, as I said, I'm retired, so that's a nice thing. But I did a lot of editing, freelancing, freelance editing, and I could normally, because of the structural edit part of it that I'm really good at, I could usually get about $80 or $90 an hour for that. And I preferred to do that kind of work. I spent a long time doing some data journalism that I loved because I love getting lost in Excel. I made zero money, but I had the best time. I enjoyed it. So, but it doesn't pay. Journalism doesn't pay in that way.
So mine's a little different. It's a little weird. I typically don't do an hourly rate unless I'm working with a big company. like NFL films, or if I'm working with a news outlet. But typically what I do is I charge a day rate for 6 to 8 hours. In Texas, it's $1,000. If I have to travel to you, it's 1,500 plus any expenses. And I outsource my editing now. And so it's a flat $200 fee that they charge me to edit anything that I send them for the project. So I roughly walk away with 1,000 to 1,500 per project.
Nice.
All right. Are contracts typically provided by the media outlet, or should I have a contract as a freelancer? That might be in your handout that you linked to, right, Hazel?
No, it isn't there.
Oh,
What I'll say is this: a lot of outlets are going to hand you a contract. As I said before, you can negotiate out some of the really bad stuff in there.
so you just need to, sorry, go ahead.
But I don't think it's a bad idea for you to have a contract outline of, in case somebody says, oh, what do you mean I need to send you a contract?
Mm.
You might as well have one. There is, let's see if I can find the, I'm gonna try to put something else in the chat.
Sure.
I know we're almost out of time. Ruth.
Yeah, and we have a lot of questions. I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to get to all of these questions unless people really want to hang out.
I'm putting in the chat another link to a folder with freelance resources from SPJ. And I'm pretty sure there's something in there on contracting.
I'm just going to grab a couple of more questions. And there's one for you, Lauren. You said you're open to pitches. Have you had university students write for Texas Monthly? And Elizabeth wants to know too.
Yeah, we have. Our interns certainly do digital bylines and sometimes print. Again, apply for the internship if you're a student. But we have one writer now who's quite talented, who either just graduated or is about to graduate, and he's actually doing like print features now. So it can certainly be done with the right pitch and the right writer.
Thanks. And we'll make this the final question. Mira mentioned that students can begin freelancing now without experience. Where would you suggest that we begin pitching stories? With no experience, what are the best outlets to pitch stories or freelance for?
I'd say if you have a really good idea, you can, and you're, pitch it anywhere, but I feel like you'll have more success for, number one, the publications you read. So I like to pitch in a publication's voice. I think Lauren mentioned that earlier, is she wants to see somebody who is voicey, who understands Texas Monthly, who's a reader. So pitch publications that you already read, pitch publications that may be like niched down. There's a lot of great gaming reporters and like video game reporters. And there's a ton of blogs out there that accept freelance writers with little to no experience. You can also, a great way to get some clips is to get on your student newspaper, to write for your own website, at least have some published writing materials that an editor can reference, whether that's on your website, whether that's your student newspaper, whether it's some really niche blog. But usually those kind of smaller publications that are focused on one or two particular beats will be more acceptable to early career journalists who don't have a lot of clips.
Ruth, I put the link to our pitching database in the chat.
Great.
And it's on the Freelance Communities Hub on spj.org. So you can always have access to it from there.
Thank you. Yes, I've used that myself. So thank you for doing that research so I didn't have to. It's really, really valuable. So Elizabeth, did you have any burning questions that you wanted before we end, or?
Everything was covered, and it's just like the questions that were asked, I was interested, I was like, yes.
All right. Any final comments from any of our guests? And by the way, how do students apply for that internship?
I don't have a link handy right now, but it's on our like careers and internships page.
Okay.
I would highly encourage it. It's paid.
Got it. Got it. So any other final comments, pieces of advice, encouragement?
I have one. I would say if you're an early career journalist or student journalist who wants to be, who wants to start freelancing as a career, know when you are being lowballed. Don't take things that are below your worth. If you feel like you're being lowballed, you're probably being lowballed. I don't want to see any more student journalists exploited for their labor, for their talent, for their hard work. You deserve to be paid for your work accordingly. So make sure that you are, make sure you're working with people who want to pay you for your time and who appreciate you. Don't take something just because you think that it'll give you the clips or the experience. I had 3 unpaid internships while I was a full-time student with a full-time job. I do not recommend you do that. I was exhausted. And I want to see this industry fundamentally change for the better. So it's time we start advocating for our younger freelancers.
Thank you.
I would also just add that it doesn't have to be like a binary. I have been a freelance writer and a staff editor on and off for my whole career. And those 2 things each one is a really nice break from the other. So you're not like signing yourself off to a life alone in the forest if you do go freelancing, and just making sure you're ready to jump ship for one or the other is key.
Thanks. And Chris, anything from the video world that you can share?
It's not always going to be the easiest, but as long as you guys continue to believe in what you're doing and continue to pursue it, it works as long as you work as well, right? Having the mentality that either it has to work or it has to work. I think one thing that scared me when I graduated was that I saw so many of my classmates who graduated, got degrees in the field, and it didn't work out for them necessarily. So they completely gave up and chose other fields, which there's nothing wrong with that. I went into other industries, but I say, as long as you work, it'll work as well. You guys just continue to keep that passion, understand that it is a business, like Mira was saying, know your worth as well, and it will work out for you ultimately.
Thanks. Hazel, you looked like you were about to burst with some words of wisdom yourself. Okay.
No, I agree so much with what everybody else has said.
Great. Thank you guys so much. This really has been very enlightening and informative, and I'm sure that our audience got a lot out of it. I really appreciate you taking the time. So, Elizabeth, I'll leave it to you to wrap things up. You've got some final comments.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. It's been like, for me, for being a student in college, like having y'all speak to us about it is like really helpful for us. Like we're barely getting started, and having this advice is really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for doing
coming.
this,
Good
Ruth
night.
and Elizabeth and Ryan.